Africa offers a fantastic opportunity for changing the climate scenario on the continent as well as globally. First of all, historically, Africa has been a the emissions from the continent have been minimal. And so it doesn't come with the historical baggage of being a huge net emitter. But that can change if we don't change course right now, because there's hunger for economic growth, there's a rapidly growing population, and there's a really youthful, population that is extremely hungry for development. And so with that, either we can be able to change the way business work in terms of economic development so that Africa does not become a huge net emitter, which is the fantastic opportunity that we have now for pivoting the development on this continent. And so you have a fantastic opportunity here to change the course of history towards a more sustainable growth trajectory for one of the fastest growing continents, but also for a majority of youthful generation that provide both the ideas for innovation as well as the labor that is needed to drive that innovation. So African Climate Summit must tap into that. The second point that African Climate Summit offers is the fantastic opportunity to bring together different stakeholders that have traditionally been left out of the negotiation space. And we are thinking about, for instance, the private sector. There's so much space for private sector to come and show the innovative ideas that they are working on, innovative technologies that can be able to drive green growth on the continent. But also for those opportunities to be matched with investors that are looking for places to invest on the continent. This is the place for that partnership. And of course, the opportunity to share knowledge, opportunity to bring different voices into the space, the voices of women, the voices of indigenous people, the voices of marginalized groups into this space to talk about a sustainable growth agenda for the continent. And lastly, it's the opportunity that the continent itself, presents in terms of the green opportunities, for instance, on energy, the geothermal power that we can be able to drive green energy transition from countries such as Kenya, the opportunity to be able to invest in direct air capture in places like the Greater Rift Valley that stretches across the continent, the opportunities to be able to preserve the natural ecosystems that are so crucial for biodiversity, but also for keeping the carbon that is already in the biomass and carbon that is already in the soil intact, so that we are preserving that and not releasing it into the atmosphere. I'll give an example of a fantastic program that WRI and partners lead called the Africa AFR 100, Africa Restoration Initiative 100. And Africa Restoration Initiative 100 started basically as a movement that is recognizing the extent of land degradation on the continent, and there's something that needs to be done about it. And that land degradation can be turned into a fantastic opportunity, which is basically the reversing of land degradation or restoring that land that has already been degraded. Almost 60% of arable land or land that is under cultivation on the continent is currently degraded, and the extent of degradation continues to expand even to the natural ecosystems as we clear forests, as we clear other natural ecosystems that are very critical for the continent. But we realized that on one hand, there were big investors who were prepared to invest in landscape restoration, but they said they couldn't find an investable portfolio or pipelines that they can be able to direct those investments to at the local level. And so through AFR 100, we've been able to look at how do we bring together those big investors and look at a small local innovators that are restoring land and link them together. The Africa Climate Summit presents an opportunity to give these kind of examples that landscape restoration doesn't need to be a benevolent process where it's all grant-based. There are so many innovators that are thinking about it from an investment perspective, and we just need to make those linkages. And we are doing that through AFR 100. We can do that in the energy sector. We can do that in the regenerative agriculture sector, where we have so many, again, innovators on addressing issues around the way we are growing food, addressing issues around the way we are transporting, processing, and packaging food into sustainability elements, innovators who are thinking around how we are doing different elements in addressing food loss and food waste. We've got fantastic innovators around circular food systems that need investments to come on board. And so it's just thinking around the whole ecosystem, from those who've got the money to those who need the money to drive sustainable investments, but also recognizing that there are areas that will not necessarily be looking for loans or looking for equity. There are areas that we have to recognize that these are public goods and public services that are being provided, and therefore grant financing need to continue to flow to this ecosystem of players. Globally, food systems are responsible for at least a third of greenhouse gas emissions. So, 30%, that's that's significant. There's no way we are going to hit the 1.5 degrees Celsius, of warming, maintaining that, or even trying to contain that if we don't address emissions that are coming from the food systems. So if we have to address the greenhouse gas emissions, and especially the mitigations aspect, food system is a critical dynamic that we need to look into. On the other hand, of course, we know agriculture is one of the biggest and most vulnerable system from climate change, and especially for Africa. We see, for instance, emissions that are coming from food systems, but also food system in itself. When we have, for instance, adverse effects of climate change, and especially drought, which is something that is very prevalent on the African continent. The Horn of Africa, countries like Kenya, Ethiopia, South Sudan, Somalia, the whole Horn of Africa has been a huge region that has been affected severely by drought. But also we are seeing other devastating effects in the southern parts of Africa. For instance, we saw Cyclone Freddy, one of the most dangerous cyclones that we've ever experienced on this continent in the last few decades, affecting huge agriculture production, as well as other dynamics of livelihoods in countries like Malawi, which were being touted as countries that were really improving on food security dynamics. So you see, even if you try to increase the yields in countries like Malawi, and then you have a devastating effect like the Cyclone Freddy, it wipes out all the progress that had been made on food security on the continent. So agriculture is very vulnerable to climate change, but it's also a major contributor. And so really what we need to build those kind of resilient food systems that we need for the future is to think not just about today, but the kind of climate change impacts that are expected. So we need better data. We need better data to work with our farmers to know, for instance, what are the kind of changes that farmers are likely to see in terms of temperature, in terms of droughts, in terms of water shortages, and then how can we buffer our food systems against those kind of challenges. It's not going to be happening just automatically. It has to be a process that is informed by data, by evidence, and working very closely with farmers. Regenerative agriculture offers a fantastic opportunity because it helps us to work to regenerate nature. So where land is degraded, we rebuild the soil health, where that means that we are producing food without harming nature, but also regenerating what we've already lost in terms of nature. That's fantastic. And so we need to look beyond producing food without harming nature to looking at food systems as a system approach that integrates the nature or the environmental aspects, that integrates the economic aspect, and that integrates the social aspect. You can produce food in particular areas, but that will not guarantee that every poor African or every person that is hungry in the continent or even in a country accesses that food. The social dynamics of equity, of food redistribution to areas that will not be able to produce food will become extremely crucial. There's an African saying that if your house is on fire, you do anything and everything to try and save and change things. If your house is not on fire, you might be in a very comfortable space that you don't recognize the urgency for action. And so we are seeing countries in the Sahelian part of the world that are extremely vulnerable to drought, and others investing a lot on changing the way nature is working. We have fantastic examples, for instance, of farmer-managed natural regeneration in countries like Niger, which are reversing land degradation. Over 5 million hectares of land in Niger being reversed from barely deserts into green spaces through technologies that are farmer-driven, that are farmer-owned, and that are scaled to that kind of extent. Beyond the talks that are going to happen, let's see, let's see changes in terms of policies that are being recommended. Let's see innovative deals for sustainable innovations that are happening around energy, around food systems, around nature, that are happening at the climate change, that are saying this is what we are committing to, and this is what we are able to deliver within, limited or within defined timeframes. And lastly, let's see more engagement of civil societies into this space, not just as a way of saying things are not happening the way they should be happening, but civil societies bringing forth innovative ideas, bringing together different communities that are usually excluded from the climate change discourse, so that it's not the same faces that we see. Let's see more faces of innovators, of smallholder farmers, of indigenous people, really talking about what they're already doing and what kind of help they will need, so that we are linking them directly with investors, we are linking them directly with policymakers, we are linking them directly with the solutions that exist at the Africa Climate Summit.